Dr. Jaime Zuckerman, also known as Dr. Z, is a licensed clinical psychologist and relationship coach specializing in narcissistic abuse. Hi, Dr. Z.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. I was just saying to you, it's so weird because I've been following you for years on Instagram, so I feel like I know you. Like
I
when you got
know.
on, I was like, "Oh, hey,
How
like
you
we're
doing?
besties." I wanted to ask you though, because obviously you have a ton of credentials, but you've now narrowed it down to focus specifically on narcissistic abuse. Was there some catalyst that made you go in this direction?
Yeah, so great question. I always get asked this question. So there were two main things. The
Okay.
first was when I went into private practice many, many moons ago. I started seeing this pattern. I saw mostly women, but men too. But I was seeing a lot of women coming in with, they'd say they had anxiety or depression. But as we started working on it, it really wasn't that, and it was really that they were in these narcissistic, abusive, either, intimate relationships or family relationships, even friendship or coworkers, and nobody knew how to identify it. Nobody knew what it was. It was so confusing to even begin to talk about. And so I realized very quickly that there really were very few resources clinically for
Mhm.
people that were in these relationships. And so it kind of stemmed from that. Um, and I always say for when I was in graduate school, we didn't really dive that much into narcissistic personality disorder at all. If anything, we talked about borderline personality disorder, but really, we kind of were given a really quick overview
Mm.
of like the stereotypical Hollywoodized version of what narcissistic personality disorder is, which is a part of it, but definitely not the whole picture. And so that happened. And so I started getting into it for private practice because I just found it was such a need. And then I kind of had a front row seat to one of my nearest and dearest friends going through it
Mm.
and kind of witness it firsthand and realize, there is such a need for this and people feel so lost and so confused and they don't know what end is up and there's so much healing that needs to come with that. So that's kind of why I really started to narrow that down.
God, I mean, you just pinged so many different questions for me, so I'm just gonna try to start with one, and then
Yeah.
we'll try to cover all
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
But you mentioned in grad school, y'all not really covering this, and
Mhm.
the next thing I wanted to ask you about was obviously narcissism has become or narcissist has become such a buzzword
Yeah.
everywhere. I feel like anytime I open my social media, and obviously, like, it's in my algorithm because I've clicked on it a bunch, but
Yeah.
I feel like it's still everywhere. So why, when you were going through school, was this barely touched on, and why do you think that it's so much more widely discussed?
I think it's a couple things. I think first is when you're dealing with narcissistic personality disorder, the quote percentage of people that they say that are diagnosed with this is very, very, I would say, misrepresented. And
Yeah.
so originally it was thought to be this very tiny portion of the population for a couple reasons. One, they don't present for treatment. So really, it's kind of this weird secondhand diagnosis of somebody that you're not really even treating. You're treating usually the significant others or the friends or the family members. You're not treating the narcissist themselves. And if you are, it's very short lived. So I think that's a big part of it. And I think that because of that and because there was so much misinformation about it that people were always experiencing it, they just never knew what it was. They would
Mhm.
sooner assume that they were having communication issues or that yes, they were in an abusive relationship, but they couldn't really put their finger on it and they really blame themselves that they were at fault because it's so manipulative like that. So it's very hard to identify. And then obviously with social media, I think is when it really started to kind of take off for better or worse.
Yeah.
Because I hate when diagnoses trend. It
Yeah.
just it's good and it's bad. But with social media, I think people started sharing their stories. And I think survivor stories are one of the most important aspects of treatment. And so I think when people started seeing other people going through this and saying, oh my God, that's my life.
Mhm.
Or if I even posted something like, wait, what? Wait, what? There's a name for this. There's this the thing. And then I think with COVID in particular, that's when I mean I'd always specialized in this, but that's when I really saw an uptick in people really kind of understanding what it was and realizing that this is something that they either experienced or were experiencing.
That's interesting. Do you think it's because during COVID we were at home more, and so they're spending more time with the said narcissist?
That there was nowhere to go, there was nowhere to
Yeah.
escape, but also because our only outlet was social media. And
Mm,
so everybody was kind of gravitating towards TikTok and Instagram and way more than they normally would have. And people were either posting more about it or people were reading more about it,
mhm.
whatever the case may be. I think that's when it really started to kind of go in that direction for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you mentioned the good and bad about it being such a talked about thing on social media, and I wanna kinda dive into that because that is the personal experience that I have had as someone who has gone through relationships like this to almost the point of my own demise, like, completely. Like, it will take you out, and we'll get into that a little bit, but, um, I've really relate to the good and bad of it because good being it helped me feel less crazy to hear some of these, people who specialize in it like you. I've told you I've been
Mhm,
following you for years, and
mhm.
one of the reasons was because I didn't have that much knowledge about exactly what I was going through, and it does make you feel so crazy. So when someone is specifically describing your situation, it is so validating, and you're
Yeah,
like, "Oh my god, thank God."
yeah,
There's the relief. But then on the flip side, like you said, because it's so widely discussed now, I feel like in some ways it's like, "Oh, well, everyone's a narcissist." And so it kind of
exactly.
loses its power. So what
Mhm.
are you seeing with maybe the bad or the negative trends happening with it being so easily labeled and discussed like this?
So I think, well, the downside is that
Yeah,
exactly like you said, just because somebody's a jerk, just because somebody broke up with you, just because somebody cheated on you, just
right.
because somebody wronged you does not mean they're a narcissist. Just because somebody's selfish, just because somebody's self absorbed does not make them a narcissist. Somebody who is a narcissist, it is a very distinct and pervasive personality style that infiltrates all aspects of their life. It's not just with one person. It's
Mhm.
not like they're gonna be, I mean, they will be different with other people, but that's part of their pattern, but they won't truly inherently be different and better with somebody else, So I think that's a big part of it. The other is I think sometimes because for some reason, and I've noticed this a lot because I get a lot of criticism about this. When you have a mental health diagnosis, particularly narcissistic personality disorder, and you have clinicians like myself stating the facts, stating the symptoms, stating the behaviors that you'll see. You get a lot of pushback in the sense of, why are you bad mouthing? You're a psychologist, right? Why are you bad mouthing people with a mental health set? And here's the thing it's, I think that people are so quick to say, they're a narcissist or the reverse. Not everyone's a narcissist. And then it waters down what it really
Right.
is. And people don't want to come forward because they don't wanna get that label of, "Oh, just because they were rude to you means they're a narcissist." It's it's that the behavior sounds that bad because they are that bad, right? They it really is that bad, and so I get a lot of pushback, "Well, these are wounded people too," and I'm not saying they aren't, but what I am saying is that there's plenty of wounded people who don't deliberately harm other people. And, I'm not going to say to my patients who are, I always say this because this is true. Some of my female patients who are married, I'm not going to say to my female patients that the reason why their spouse forces them to have sex with them and do things they don't want to do is because they're wounded people.
Mm,
Right. So I think what ended up happening was it watered down what narcissistic personality disorder, what narcissistic abuse really is. And so
yeah.
people are hesitant to come forward. Sometimes people with very large platforms who may have experienced this themselves, and not to downplay their experiences, I think they're very important. I think then try to educate on the diagnosis without
Mhm.
having the clinical understanding and the behavioral understanding of the nuances of it. And I think that gets people into trouble.
Yeah, I totally, totally agree with that. Well, let's maybe dive into what narcissism really is. We had Dr. Keith Campbell on the podcast.
Mhm.
This was years ago, and it was actually in the trenches of me going through my own relationships like this and kind of starting to uncover what narcissism was. And I was digging deep, but I was still so scared to speak about this topic.
Yeah.
And I think that would make sense to you if you know anything about narcissism, but it's almost crippling what it does to your brain to be on the other side of it,
Oh,
and
yeah.
so I was trying to dip my toe in, and he was a very perfect, interview for me for that because he wrote a book about the sliding scale of
Mhm,
narcissistic traits. So there's
mhm.
narcissistic personality disorder as you're talking about it. But then obviously, like we all have a little bit of, a narcissistic trait here and there. So can you speak to that and help my listeners understand the difference between having one narcissistic trait, having narcissistic personality disorder, or even having a high narcissistic streak is, I guess, what my therapist started
Mhm.
calling it. So,
Mhm,
can you
mhm.
speak to that a little bit and help the listeners understand?
Yeah, sure. So, yes, all of us have traits where, whether we want to call them narcissistic traits or whatever the case may be. But the difference is that when you're talking about those types of traits, they're fluid, meaning, when you or I are doing something, let's say that we really excel at,
Mhm.
right? So you on your podcast, right? Like your confidence and you feeling empowered, that's going to show through more because it's your podcast. You know what you're doing. You know what I'm saying? It's
Yeah.
yours. You own it. So that's going to come out more. But if you were to, you know, go rock climbing, and let's say you've never
Mhm.
gone rock climbing in your life, you're not going to carry that same kind of persona about you into a different situation where you don't know anything about it. You're going to
Sure,
take in
yeah.
information. You're going to be able to take a step back, put yourself in check, right? And so that in that sense, it's fluid, right? Sometimes when you're doing things where you're very confident, we see this with athletes a lot, right? When they're doing what they're good at, their narcissistic traits, maybe they're higher or their confidence
Mhm.
level is extremely high. But when they're at home with their family or they're doing something else, it's not there. Not saying they're not confident, but you see that variation, right? They know when to be one way, they switch it to another to adapt to the situation.
Okay.
Well, then you have people that on the surface, their behaviors may look extremely similar to narcissistic personality disorder. Their patterns, what they say, how they act. However, it could be that they are repeating the only things that they've known, right? Maybe they grew up in an environment and they're repeating the patterns, or their strategy is the total opposite of what they grew up in to kind of compensate for that. But when brought to their attention and their awareness that their behaviors or their patterns are hurting other people,
Mhm.
and maybe they just don't have that awareness, and you bring it to their attention, their intention or the function of their behavior isn't to harm others.
Mm.
So when you bring it to their attention, they may be scared as hell to change it. It may be very difficult, but the purpose or the why behind their behavior is not power and control. With a
Yes.
narcissist, their behaviors across the board will always be about power and control. It doesn't matter how you dress it up. It could be taking you to dinner, it could be starting an argument with you on your birthday, it could be anything. It could be getting you a gift, it could be calling you for help. Whatever it is, there's always an underlying function of power and control, always. And
Okay.
so I always tell people that those types of behaviors with a narcissist, it's going to happen all the time.
Mhm.
It's not fluid. It is constant. It's a characteristic. It's never going to change. That is who they are. Doesn't matter what you do differently, how you respond. That's who they are. That's not shifting.
Yeah. The power and control piece is interesting because I used to describe it as I just feel like it's always about winning.
Yeah,
That's what
it
it
is.
is, right? Like,
Yep.
it just felt like no matter what was happening or what was said or what was done or what could be easier if the outcome was more mutual, it
Yeah.
felt like the win was the most important thing at all times.
And it's not even the win. I would take it one step further and I would say it's because they wouldn't care if they lost or they won, as long as whatever it was gave them access to manipulate your thoughts, your emotions, and your
Mhm.
behaviors. So it's that winning, I think what you're describing is more of as long as they can gain access to your internal world, right? Whether they're physically present or not. But as long as what they're doing is giving them control and power over you and therefore taking control and power away from you.
So is there a situation where someone can be very high, like if we're using that scale as the indicator here, they can be very high in narcissistic traits and not have full-blown narcissistic personality disorder?
Yeah, there can be. I
Okay.
think what you'll find is that they're probably very difficult to deal with. I think that you'll find that the defining variable is that function again, is that they don't necessarily want to harm people, but the thought of giving up control is very scary to them.
Mhm.
So I think you'll find that more and more where you get to narcissistic personality disorder, it's, you know, you're in the way of getting what they need, and they'll do whatever they need to do to get power and control in those situations, or they'll do whatever they need to do to manipulate the situation, and there's no remorse or empathy about that. And
Mhm.
they're aware of it. They're aware that they're doing that. They don't care, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, they don't care is exactly what was coming to my mind,
Mhm.
which is such an interesting thing because if you're a human with any sort of compassion or empathy, that is just not it doesn't even cross your mind
No.
to not care. You know, I've
Nope.
I've been in so many situations, and I know in my situation specifically, I could not wrap my mind around what was happening because my brain genuinely does not think that way. Like I
Yeah.
I could not process laying my head down to go to sleep at night, doing the kind of things that were happening. So I just kept trying to almost rationalize that, oh, it can't be that. It looks like this, it smells like this, it walks like this, it talks like this. But like it can't be that because how could a person do
Yeah.
that? Like
Yeah.
that is literally what would go through my mind all the time.
That's, I think, one of the defining moments I have with a lot of my patients is that moment of clarity where you realize there are no other alternative responses except the one you really don't want it to be. Because
Yeah.
if you accept that that's really what it is, your entire, view of people, of humanity
Mhm.
almost, your entire view of the world is kind of pulled out from under you. And you
Yeah.
have to reformulate how you view things now, and it makes people, really it really throws people. It really throws people.
Oh, and it takes forever for it to fully sink in, I think,
Yeah,
or it did for me at least,
yeah,
to really
yeah,
fully accept it and name it and say what it was and know that it was not gonna change
that's right.
takes forever. It took a
And that
really
it has
long
nothing
time,
to do with you.
and that it has nothing to do with
And that's
you.
hard that's
Mhm,
hard to understand too, because to think that somebody would do this just because they can,
mhm.
or just because it made them feel better, is, even though they saw the pain that you were in and there was no empathy there, it's a very difficult pill to swallow.
Very difficult. Well, you mentioned that, narcissists, or people with high narcissistic traits are also wounded. And I want to talk a little bit about the origin of narcissism and
Mhm,
why someone would even develop these kind of traits. Are you
mhm.
just born this way? Is it a nature versus nurture thing? How does this happen and why does it stay?
Yeah, so there's a lot of theories out there, but primarily what people will tell you and what the research will tell you is that, it really comes from your developmental upbringing. What starts originally, let's say, as children, we're very smart when we're children. And
Mhm.
so we come up with very creative ways to make sense and navigate our world. And when our world is chaotic and uncertain, right? So we see this a lot with domestic violence. We see this with, when one caregiver has a drug or alcohol problem or is neglectful. So, any type of chaotic upbringing, the child has to navigate that. And so, what may have worked for them in childhood, right? Let's say putting up a wall and never letting people get to them ever again. They're never going to let anybody make them feel like crap ever again. That helps them, right, through childhood, let's say. But then once you're out of that dynamic and you're out of that context and there's no need for that severe of a behavioral response anymore, but yet you're still acting in that way, understandably so, throughout your adulthood, it's not working anymore, right? You
Mhm.
start to hit walls, and your unwillingness or inability to identify that that needs to shift oftentimes leads you into unhealthy relationships, down the route of personality disorders, because they're so solidified and they're so ingrained in terms of your brain and how you operate and how you view yourself in relation to the world.
Yeah. So it almost starts as a survival skill, just
Yes.
like everything else. So what is the difference between like I know, a lot about addiction. We talk a lot about addiction on this podcast. And when someone is in active addiction, they are highly narcissistic typically, or that's been my experience, I guess I should say. They can be. And then when someone is in, let's say, like an avoidance attachment
Hmm.
style, that can also really read like narcissism.
Hmm.
But then I've also experienced addicts that get sober and that those traits start to go away if they're
Yes.
working a program. And then with avoidance, I've had the same situation where if they start
Yes.
working with a therapist, a lot of those traits go away. So what is the difference between those kind of diagnosis and maybe a narcissist that is beyond help or growing or changing or anything like that? How do we differentiate between that if we're in a relationship like this?
So I'll try not to get too clinical with this, but
Okay.
substance abuse disorders
Mhm.
and these kind of avoidant styles of interacting with people, whether it's anxiety, whether it's low self-esteem, they're not personality disorders.
Okay.
So they're axis 1 disorders. Axis 2 disorders are personality disorders. So
Okay.
the difference is that personality disorders are very much this way, right? They're very much about there's a disconnect between your ability to see you in kind of in conjunction with the world and working together. It's like you in isolation and everybody else is kind of
So you against the
in your world.
world.
In a way, yeah. That
Okay.
everybody with narcissistic personality disorder, it's like everybody's kind of an object
Mhm.
and a prop in your movie, right?
Yeah.
So with substance abuse, the reason why oftentimes while people are using that it looks narcissistic, and we see this a lot with anxiety and depression too, is because it's such a self-focused
Mhm.
diagnosis. It's so much about self-consumption and just getting what you need, getting what you need, getting what you need because you need it, right?
Mhm.
Physiologically, you need
Mhm.
it. You'll do whatever you need to do to get it. It alters your personality. It makes you angry. It makes you rage. It makes you, switch on and off really fast. So it looks very unstable. It looks very self absorbed. It looks very selfish on the surface. But again, and same with avoidant attachment style, right? We
Right.
see avoidant attachment style in anxiety disorders and depression. People that are avoidant with avoidant attachment, say, and anxiety disorders, they don't not want to connect with people. They're just scared or
Right.
they don't have the social skills, which is why sometimes we see people misdiagnose autism sometimes or
Mhm.
Asperger's with
Mhm.
narcissistic personality disorder,
Okay, that makes sense to me.
because it's the kind of social skills are a little bit off, but they don't want to not connect. They just are either scared, they don't have the strategies to do so. So it looks narcissistic, but again, I go back to the function of the behavior, right? It's not about power and control, right? Those maybe it's they're fearful, they don't want to get hurt, they're scared, and with substance abuse, that's a whole different situation. But when they're sober, if they had narcissistic personality disorder, you wouldn't see that go away.
Right.
It would be there consistently, whether they were using or not. And then with somebody who's avoiding intimacy or avoiding relationships or is kind of that push pull dynamic, if they develop the strategies to manage the anxiety and the uncertainty and the discomfort of being with somebody, then you see a change in their behavior. Somebody with narcissistic personality disorder, you're not going to see any meaningful changes. They're always going to be that way. That's what I'm saying. On the surface, a lot of the stuff looks the same, but the underlying reason why they're doing it is very different.
Can a narcissist go to therapy and change?
They can go to therapy, they won't go to therapy. If they do go to therapy, it's usually because they are either court mandated,
Yeah.
right, for like quote co-parenting, which is a whole other topic in and of itself. Or let's say they're in a relationship with somebody or in a family dynamic and they're saying, well, I'll go to couples therapy with you, which is the worst thing to do with a narcissist.
In there.
The worst thing to
It
do.
was terrible.
Yeah, I never recommend that, and so,
Yeah.
they don't think anything's wrong, and if you don't like their behavior, well, that's on you. You have to figure
Mhm.
that out, and so they'll either not stay, or if the therapist buys into it, which
Mhm.
happens a lot,
Mhm.
then, it's their show, it's their platform, and they'll use it, but not to get better. So even with the best of the best of the best therapists, for a narcissist, a true narcissist, to make any meaningful, sustainable change outside of the therapy, I I mean, I hate saying never, but it's pretty damn close. I'd say 90.9% they're
Yeah.
not gonna change.
Yeah. Well, and I wanna talk a little bit about I love that you just mentioned the couples therapy piece because that, as I've just said, it was an experience that I had, and I am so grateful that I had done all of the work on myself
Yes.
before I got in that situation because
Yeah.
I was able to call out what was happening. But what was happening to me was so dangerous that if I hadn't had I mean, any sort of the knowledge that I had had or the experience of healing that I had had, it would have taken me out even further. And I was in such a dark place already. So it was like I just had so much it actually made me so upset about the therapy world in general that this can happen because
Yeah.
I think it is so incredibly dangerous for the people that are in the partnership with the narcissist. But what would happen for me is before I knew it, every session was about what I was doing wrong. There was never anything really being discussed about their part of anything. And that was not why we started going to
That's
therapy.
right.
And I
That's
was
right.
doing individual stuff on my own. I had for almost a decade. So the fact that that was happening to me was it was just very scary to me to witness. Is that what you see often in your couples therapy experiences with that?
All the time.
Okay.
All the time. I tell people, they're like, "Well, should we go to couples therapy?" No.
Yeah.
No, because a couple things happen. Um, Unfortunately, a lot of therapists aren't trained to pick up on the nuances of narcissistic personality disorder or
Right.
narcissistic abuse. So, if you go to couples therapy with your partner who's a narcissist, they're going to either charm the therapist, and they're so good at manipulating and gaslighting, and you're already going in confused and scared and uncertain and unsure if the
You're a
behaviors that
shell
you're
of a
saying,
human.
you're a shell.
Yeah.
And so you don't want to speak your truth because you're petrified, because you have to drive home with this person, and being in a
Mhm.
car with an angry narcissist is not where you want to be.
Nope.
You have to go into the house with them, put your head on the pillow next to them, or you have to, still see them at family events, whatever it is. And so it's not safe for the survivor to be in that dynamic. And then they're gaslit even more unintentionally by the therapist, because the whole focus of therapy becomes how you are a bad communicator, how it's a communication issue, not an abuse issue, how you somehow play some role in this when you don't. And, I think the worst thing I've ever heard that a couples therapist had said, because they didn't pick up on this, was they would encourage the couple to go on a date night once a week.
I'm
And
dying because that was what we
yes,
did.
yes. And so
Yep.
here you are, you're being physically abused, verbally abused, sexually abused, and you're being told by somebody who's supposed to help you to go on date night
Mhm.
with your abuser.
Mhm.
It is absolutely crazy. And so you are totally re-traumatized, completely invalidated. And here's this professional who is supposed to be helping you, and you're leaving. Now you feel even more disheartened. So the likelihood of you going to therapy now, if the therapist thinks that this isn't an issue, well, maybe it's not. So it just isolates you even further. So I tell people exactly like you did. You have to do the work yourself
Yeah.
prior to, if you do go to couples therapy. And let's just say you have a therapist, because a lot of people say, well, it actually was the best thing that could have happened to me because the therapist was able to confirm that, yes, this person was a narcissist. And then what'll happen is, I've had this happen so many times. They'll say, can I bring my spouse in to the session? And I'll know exactly what about. So, once in a while, then sure, you can bring them in. And I do it on purpose, because they will try to manipulate, they'll try
Mhm.
to gaslight me. I already know what's going on, so I set
Right.
my boundaries. If it's a female, it gets very argumentative. If it's a male, it gets they try to, flirt. And then when that doesn't work,
Mhm.
they try something else. And eventually what happens, they either storm out mid-session, or they tell the partner, she's an idiot. She doesn't know what she's talking about. I'm never going back to her again. All you guys did was gang up on me, and they won't go. So, you know, that's usually what happens. But sometimes what it can do is validate somebody like you to say,
Mhm.
okay, wait, no. All right, they agree with me. I know what this is.
Well, and thank God I had individual experience, like I said, and
Yeah.
I had a great therapist, like an individual therapist. And so I was able to get my validation because you need it. Like, I
Oh,
just
yeah.
know that when I said that you're a shell of a human, it's so interesting that the timing of things. But I had a video, you know how iPhone like shows you old
Yeah.
videos, like our photos or
Yeah.
whatever? I had one pop up this week from that time of my life. And I'm not a big person, but I was probably 15 pounds lighter than I am right now, which
I
on me
believe
is
it.
a lot of weight.
Yeah.
I looked like a skeleton, and it
Yeah.
was so I almost just broke down in tears
Yeah.
seeing that because I had to keep going in life because I have
Yep.
responsibilities and jobs and all the things, but my eyes and my body were just screaming that I was in an abusive situation,
Yeah.
and, like, my eyes were vacant. I was so incredibly skinny. And I worked until I literally couldn't. Like, it was just, I had a massive breakdown because for me, it was an experience where I was in a romantic relationship, I had a work relationship that was the same way, and a friendship. So I was having the theme of narcissism
Yeah.
come up in multiple things, but I think that happens to people.
Yes.
And so I wanna talk a little bit about who this is happening to, because the reason I wanna keep talking about this is I don't view myself as a weak person. I don't view
You're
myself as a victim or
yeah.
anything like that. I feel very capable in life, but I was not. And I have also done a ton of work on myself, and I continue to always have a growth mindset that almost made me more susceptible to this kind of situation. And I want to talk about that so that anyone else, either in this situation or coming across people like that, don't end up where I ended up.
Mhm.
So, can we
Mhm.
talk about what you're seeing in people that are victims of narcissistic abuse or survivors, or however you want to describe
Yeah.
it? What does
Yeah.
that typically look like?
Yeah. So when you say that you were a shell of your former self, I hear this all the time and it breaks my heart. So the that feeling is because, a narcissist, what they do, their ultimate goal is to gain total control over you. And so
Yeah.
what they do is they will in a very subtle way, you don't realize this is happening until later on, slowly and systematically kind of erode your self-esteem one layer at a time, over time, till before you know it, you are a total shell of your former self. You have this trauma bond with them where you know that they are horrible for you. You know this relationship is horrible. And at the same time, the thought of leaving is absolutely
Mm.
it's just so unbelievably frightening, and you've been isolated, and you have been gaslit, so you don't even trust your own perception of things or who you can trust, and so it's very scary to leave, even though you know it's not good for you. And I think
Yeah.
one of the things that I heard from a client once that I think really hits the nail on the head for that kind of feeling afterwards of that empty shell is she said, I she said, "I feel like a shell of who I was." She said, "I don't even know what flavor ice cream I like."
Mm.
And it sounds so ridiculous, but if you really think about it, we all know what flavor ice cream we like. We all know what kind of music we like. We know what clothes we like to wear. We know what music, what movies we like. She had no sense of identity down to not even knowing the kind of food she likes because she was sold this narrative the entire time of who she was supposed to be down to her choices of food.
Mhm.
Right? So when you say that, you view yourself as a strong person, one of the biggest, I think, misconceptions of people who get into these relationships is that narcissists go for, people with low self-esteem who are, kind of just have no opinion, have no backbone. And then that's not true.
Mhm.
They narcissists go for people who are empathetic, sure, because they want that from them. They crave that. They don't have that, but they go for people who tend to be very successful in what they do, very strong, have a lot of opinions, have a lot to offer. They don't go for weak people. They go for the opposite. Number one, it makes them look good. Number two, and this is the part that really, still to this day, I always say it makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The reason why is because if you have somebody who's already so low about themselves, there's nothing for the narcissist to take away from them. There's no
Mm.
power or control to gain from them. But if you have somebody who is confident and reassured and successful and loves their life and is good at living their life, well, that's way more to strip away. And they
Mhm.
get so much more from that. So that's why they tend to go for people like that. You don't go into these relationships knowing they're abusive. That's the thing what people don't realize. These relationships don't start out like this. They know what they're doing, right? There's a deliberate effort to suck you in, make you feel vulnerable, make you feel like you're special and you're almost like they've selected you, they've chosen you because there's something about you. And it feels really good. And all of us are susceptible to that. So these relationships, it's not like somebody's being abusive and you're willingly going blind into this. No, they're not like that at the beginning. By the time you realize what's happening, you're not who you were.
Mhm.
That strong person, you're still there, but it's under a lot of rubble. We have to like pull it out. But you don't have that mindset to be able to get out. If you did, then yeah, you'd get out, no question
Right.
about it. But the whole point of stripping that away is so that when you realize this is not healthy, you don't have the cognitive or emotional resources or financial resources or support to be able to pull yourself out.
Right. Well, you mentioned a couple things I want to touch on. One, empathy, because I think that can be very dangerous in this situation. And two, it's like when you realize you need to get out, the actual piece of getting out, because I mean, all I can speak about is my own experience, but I realized it very early on, actually. Like, this is not going to work. So I would try to get out. And then I am very high in empathy.
Mhm.
And the person would come back and convince me,
Yes,
no, it's different and whatever. And like I said earlier in the podcast, you can't fully grasp the fact that they're not telling the truth because that's just not how my brain works. That's not what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. So I look at it through the lens of how I would be operating. So if I'm going to a person and I'm saying, "Hey, I really want to work on this. I really want to work this out. I see what I did. I'll work on that and, really take some steps to change." I mean it.
that's
I'm
right.
not just saying it. But that wasn't my experience. And then every time I would go back because it happened, I mean, I would say for almost 2 years
Oh
of
yeah, I'm
on and
sure.
off and
Yep,
on and off and on and off and on and off.
yep,
It was like taking a tick out of, me, like you were saying. Like I just became a shell even more of myself. And I became addicted to the
yes,
chemicals of
yes.
whatever that is. And I literally started, I mean, I was diagnosing myself with all this like love addiction and all of these things. And while maybe there were some traits of that happening at the time, I don't identify with that out of a relationship with a narcissist.
No,
But I have all these other relationships. I'm like, oh, wait, I was literally taking so much ownership for all of these things being
yeah,
quote unquote wrong with me
yeah,
that weren't actually even reality.
that's right.
But can you describe that? Like, was that typical? Is that what
Yes,
is normally happening?
yes,
Okay.
100%,
'Cause that was just my
100%
experience,
normal,
but okay.
100% normal because, you know, so I always say this, on average, it's about 7 or 8 times before somebody actually leaves a relationship for good. So it's
Okay.
very rare that somebody in a narcissistic abusive relationship is gonna leave and stay,
Well, they do
and
not
stay
want you to
gone.
go. I
No,
mean,
they
they'll
don't want you
act
to
like it,
go.
but then they're back.
That's
Yeah.
right. And it's not because they want you back because they miss you or
Or they
you
love
or
you so
they love
much.
you. It's because they want to it's a couple things. One, they still want to have control and power over you, right? They want to know that they can manipulate you at any time. But also, every time you go back, they view that as almost permission giving that the way they've been acting, well, then you came back. So
It's okay.
in my eyes, it's okay.
Mhm.
Um, and the empathetic person, you know, especially for people who are in the mental health field or for people who just are always kind of looking about how to grow and learn,
Yeah.
it's it's so difficult. And even as a psychologist, I say this for me to actually say for the words to come out of my mouth that they can't change
Yeah.
takes so much to say that.
Yeah.
I don't say that casually at all because that's why I'm in this field. I think everybody
That's your whole
change.
job.
That's my whole
Yeah.
job, except for this.
Yeah.
Except for this. And all I can do is work with the people who are with them and in these relationships to help them change and stay safe and leave the relationship. But what you experienced, the blaming yourself and trying to figure out it must be something wrong with you and diagnosing yourself and and not realizing that it's a reaction, an appropriate reaction to the abuse. I mean, you're constantly being, in some way, shape, or form, being told you're not good enough, you're not doing enough, you don't love enough, you don't care enough, that they wouldn't have acted this way if you hadn't done this, and that you guys need to communicate more. So even if it's your fault, there's always this underlying vibe of we need to make this better. We need to make this work. It's you and I, and we have to fix this. And it's not a we thing. It's
Mhm.
it's not. It literally has nothing to do with you. You were caught up in this, but it is not because of you. Um, the inability to see it for what it is, it's almost like a fish in a fishbowl. That's the analogy I give. You don't you don't know you're in it. You just know you don't feel right. You know this isn't healthy. You can't identify it because you're so confused. Because abusive people, this is the thing about narcissistic abuse. And this is why it feels addicting. Narcissistic abuse in part of that cycle is that they are purposely not abusive all the time, outwardly abusive. But those stages of being nice and loving and doting and apologetic and all of that stuff is part of the abuse. It's not stages, it's a cycle. So it's not like they were abusive, but now they're getting better. No, they're just in the next stage of the cycle. So when that happens, it creates this kind of chemical addiction that you're talking about. It's this release of dopamine, these short spurts of dopamine. You never know when you're going to get it. And so you keep hanging in there. The model is actually very similar to an addiction model. So if you take gambling, for example, you never know what you're going to get. The same with a narcissistic partner.
Mhm.
You can try to predict what's going to set them off. The whole thing about narcissistic abuse is there is no rhyme or reason, and that's on purpose. If there was a pattern to what would set them off, you'd figure it out. But just when you think you figured it out, they purposely change it up again. So you have no idea what's going to set them off, which is why you're always walking on eggshells, trying everything under the sun to try to get them to stay not abusive.
Mhm.
But that is the abuse. And so if they are triggered and they are set off, it must be you because they're so nice to everybody else. And they've been so nice for so long. So clearly they're trying. But then they got set off because of something you apparently did. And so it just keeps that cycle going of thinking it's your fault when it's not.
Well, and the other thing that I think is really interesting is somehow they're always the victim even when
Yes.
they've done something.
Yes. Yep.
And that has been my experience a lot, where it's like there's a bomb dropped, and this wasn't even in my romantic relationship. This was in the other situations I was talking about too. There was a bomb drop that they create, like
Hmm.
that I really would have nothing to do with. And then somehow the spin was that I caused it. It was my fault. And then when I have an issue with that, I'm playing the
That's right.
victim.
Right.
So it's like you really cannot win. And actually, even saying like you don't, it's like you almost don't even want them to know that you're on to them because that
You
only
don't.
makes it worse.
You don't. That's right. You
Can
don't. Yeah, I
explain
tell
what's
people,
happening there?
yeah, I mean, the more you figure them out,
Yeah.
the more they're losing control over you.
Okay.
So, that's why I tell people if they're leaving these relationships, don't ever tell them that you're onto them. Don't call them a narcissist. Don't tell them that you're leaving because one, it makes you way more susceptible to manipulation, to convince you that you're wrong. And you don't want them to know that they're losing control over you because then
Mhm.
sometimes that can escalate the behavior.
Mhm.
So the more you figure them out, the more they feel they're losing control over you. And then that's when things like character assassination comes in, where they start attacking your character, start talking badly about you to other people, which they've probably already laid the groundwork ahead of time
Yep.
so that if things blow up, you lose
You look
credibility.
crazy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you look crazy, you lose credibility, no one's gonna believe you. So that starts to happen, and all of that is so that they want you to respond to that. So even in the most difficult scenarios where somebody is absolutely bashing your character around the people that you know and love, with a narcissist, the worst thing to do is try to defend yourself,
Mm.
right? Is to get your story out there.
Mhm.
Because if the function of it is to control you, the worst thing you can do is give that control. So I always tell people don't let them know you're onto them. Don't try to logic with them, or reason with them, respond to it. That's what they want. And
Mhm.
it's hard for us because when we're arguing with someone and we're upset with someone, the natural reaction is to talk it out,
Well, yeah.
to take
Especially someone you're in a
accountability.
relationship
Correct.
with.
Right. Right. Even if it pains you and you don't wanna be wrong, right? Like, we've all been there. You still have that conversation because you
Mhm.
don't want the other person to hurt.
Mhm.
And that's the difference with this.
Well, and I think I just wanna say this, if anyone is listening and they are identifying and they're stuck in this kind of relationship, I just like, first of all, I have the most empathy, sympathy, compassion for anyone going through this because for me, it was one of the hardest, if not the hardest things of my life to go
Yeah,
through and experience. And obviously, if someone is saying lies about you or making up stories or making you look bad, it's a natural human response to want to defend. So
that's
it
right.
was, I mean, I think that was one of the most difficult things for me ever was to have to keep my mouth shut and let someone continue to
Oh,
character
yeah.
assassinate me, to be the bad guy in someone's stories, even when that was impacting my life on such a big
Yes.
scale too. It's
Yes.
like systematically destroying so much that you've built.
That's right.
But also, I had a knowing of if I speak out, it's going to be worse. And like, you just can't win that war. Like, you can't win the war that of the kind of, or you can't beat them at the game that they created.
I was
So,
gonna say you can win, but you
okay.
most people you can't win in the way that you think you would win. You
Yes.
win by not participating
Right.
rather than trying to correct them or get ahead or, convince people otherwise. You actually win by because remember, isn't to their goal isn't to assassinate your character. Their
Okay.
goal is to assassinate your character so that they get a response from you, so they get into your head, so they get an emotional something out of you because what they've been doing hasn't been working.
It's almost like when you keep talking
They're
about
trying to
this,
control your narrative because they
right.
lost. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and when you keep talking about they don't care if it's good or bad, it's almost just like it's like a hit, like a drug.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, that's what it sounds like. It just sounds like they just need some sort of hit from you. So the
Yes.
more you engage, the more they get.
That's right.
That was something that really helped me during the process because again, you want to defend, you want to stand up for yourself.
Sure.
You want to I'm such a justice person. I'm like, this isn't fair. That's a big thing for me. So that was what made it so hard for me to
Yes.
leave these situations too, but knowing that they were getting more from me responding actually made it a little easier to be like, "Okay, I'm stopping."
Yeah.
Like, to make you actually quit
Yeah.
because I didn't wanna give anything anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
And it's hard because, the other thing too is that by spreading these rumors and assassinating someone's character, it's to ruin your credibility, but also so that nobody will believe the abuse.
Mm.
We see that a lot. Well, they've been laying the groundwork for years. Well, she's got a lot of depression stuff going on, or
Yeah.
she drinks a little too much, and
Yeah.
then they slowly lay those seeds so that when they need to use it, it's already been planted.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I could talk about this forever. This is such a nuanced topic,
I
but if
know.
if
I
anyone is
know.
listening and they're really, really just struggling in this situation, what's the one thing you would say? Like, what's the first step to getting help for yourself or getting out of the situation even?
Yeah, the first step, I would say, if you can find a therapist who is um, aware of these nuanced behaviors, do that. The second thing I would say is that you will be okay. There is another side to this.
Yes.
It is very difficult to get there, but I promise you that once you see the blueprint of a narcissist behavior, you absolutely 100% cannot unsee it. It is impossible to unsee it. And so you will have this moment of like this almost like you actually, it's one of the few there one of the few things that I see with patients where there's this definitive moment of, "Oh my god,"
Mhm.
where all the pieces start to fit together. Depression, anxiety, it's kind of ongoing, it ebbs, it flows, but with this, there's a very distinct moment where and it's very traumatic. I'm not saying this feels good, but it's this very specific moment where you realize, "Oh my god, this is what it is. Wait,
Mhm.
okay." And then you start putting the pieces together. It totally implodes your world. I mean, it's very difficult when you come to that realization, but it's also empowering at the same time because now that you can see these patterns, you can be a couple steps ahead to be able to predict it and then be able to respond in a much healthier way for yourself rather than trying to respond when you're kind of sucked into that web. It allows you to separate yourself and look at the behaviors rather than be tangled up in them.
Yes, you nailed it with once you see it, you can't unsee
You
it.
can,
And then
yeah.
you start seeing it in other
You
places in
see
your life or
yes.
in people you meet, and I'm like, now literally I can shake someone's hand and be like, "Okay, I'm walking away." Like,
Yes,
this
yes.
because I know I cannot engage in those kind of relationships and not go back to old behaviors that I
Yeah,
used to be in. It's not good for me, so I just
no,
have to not be in those kind of relationships,
yeah.
period, so
And it's funny, I'll have people say too, well, they take it to an extreme. They'll say, "Oh, you're gonna be so excited. I went on a date, but it was horrible." "Why was it horrible?" "He opened the door for me."
I
Like,
heard this one.
"What? What?" And so he held the door for me. Like, I can't open my own door. Like, okay, well, that doesn't mean they're a narcissist. Let's
Right.
back it up a little bit, right? So, but that's normal. It's normal to go from when you've been so, you know, in one extreme for so long. It's very normal to go to the other extreme. And that's why therapy is very helpful because it
Yes.
helps you move towards the middle. But it's very common, I see that for people to kind of go from one extreme to the other, and understandably so. I mean,
Yeah,
your
where do you think
brain's doing,
everyone's a
yeah,
narcissist?
your
Yeah,
brain's trying to protect you because it,
of
it
course.
doesn't want to go through that again.
Yes, yes. Well, if you are listening and you are resonating with anything we're saying, Dr. Z also has her own podcast, Next Up
Yes.
Narcissism, which would be also a great place to start if you're struggling with figuring out your situation because you can do it on your own. It can be secret from your partner or
Exactly.
whatever. Tell us a little bit about what you talk about on the podcast.
Yeah. So next up, narcissism, we talk about, or I should say, I talk about all different topics about narcissistic abuse and narcissistic personality disorder, from financial abuse to co-parenting with a narcissist to working with a narcissist, how to navigate the relationships, behavioral strategies. I have a lot of people come on that, are experts in certain areas of narcissistic abuse to really kind of just get into the nuances and the behaviors of it because it is, as you said, it's so specific,
Mhm.
and really kind of get people on the right path as to understanding exactly what this type of abuse is and what it is.
Yeah, I think the hardest part about this kind of abuse is it's so psychological.
Oh,
So it's
yeah.
often
Yeah.
not even you can't see it
No.
happening like from the outside all the time. So that
Mhm.
is, but if you know it. If you're in it, I do think you know it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
check out that podcast. I'm also going to put a link to your website because you have 2 books that
It's,
might also be really good resources. So you guys
yes.
go check that out. And also Instagram and
Yes.
social media. I think that you give such good sound bites and little videos that have been very helpful for me. So
Thank you.
I will put all of that again in the description of this podcast for you guys. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for talking about this. It's so important. So I hope this is helpful to your listeners.
Me too. Me too. Thank you guys for listening.